Right. Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. Praxis is a very important construct that was originally identified in adults who had brain damage. And it was identified as early as the 1900s when they had some stroke or maybe some seizure disorder where they lost function in the ability to plan and do actions, despite the fact that they had no motor impairment. In children, what we find is that they have symptoms of dyspraxia without known brain damage. And Dr. Ayers was one of the first to discover this. And what she discovered is that there was a problem in planning and initiating actions, despite having typical motor functions. So we are able to look at that association between a child's ability to do and to plan and to organize and what we would call dyspraxia. One of the unique features that Dr. Ayers discovered was there was a relationship between sensory perception and the ability to do those cognitive tasks of planning future actions. So she created an amazing set of tests, the sensory integration and praxis tests. And we have these objective measures that then look at several aspects of planning. We have construction tasks that are like block design, but it isn't just doing the block, it's imitating block structures. We have imitation of facial gestures, we have imitation of body gestures, unusual actions. We also have the ability to follow unusual directions. Not difficult language, but unusual, for example, something you do with your body. Put the back part of your feet together and your toes apart. And we also have sequential praxis, so the ability to replicate a series of movements that are unfamiliar to the child. We also have tests now on ideation, coming up with ideas about what could you do with your body? Show me 5 different things you can do with your body. Show me what you can do with these objects. So show me what you can do in space. And so we have these different assessments that show us about the range of abilities in that planning and organizational ability. What's interesting is that we find some children are able to score relatively well on tests of fine and gross motor skills, and these are kind of traditional tests that we would use in occupational therapy. But the kinds of problems that the children still present are the ability to do things that other people tell them when it's unfamiliar to them. Okay, so they usually have trouble at the beginning of the school year in understanding the routines. Sometimes they have a lot of trouble with transitions, so anticipating the future. Or if they don't know the person, being able to follow their verbal instructions. They tend to do better with similar or familiar people, or maybe younger children. It really impacts play. So what we see is their play may be quite simplistic or ritualistic, show very little variability. Some of these kids are really stuck on video games, but they don't go out and play or create play activities with other children. So reciprocal play is affected. In the classroom, we see a lot of difficulty organizing their materials in their desk. They forget their things, they're disorganized. You tell them what to do and maybe they remember 2 steps, but not all the steps in a sequence. At home, we often see problems with routine daily activities, dressing, grooming, any of those sequential activities. So we find that the caregivers are often telling us that they have to give them a prompt for everything. They know how to do it, but they don't do the whole sequence on their own, or they forget the sequence. I was very privileged to be able to do a study on autism in which we gave very comprehensive assessment of sensory integration and praxis And we ended up with 89 children in our study. And one of the most significant findings we had was that they had problems with somatic sensation, perception of body awareness. They also had problems with language-based praxis and also imitation skills. And this was a very important finding because we also saw atypical sensory reactivity. This is actually very well known in the field of autism right now. But less well known is why these children are doing repetitive activities or unable to follow instructions. And what we found is that there was a very high correlation between the poor performance on the praxis measures and social participation. In fact, it was the most significant finding we had in our research. So in my practice, in my clinical practice, what we see is that the children are often quite misunderstood. So they're looked at as being, oh, that's an autistic mannerism, they're doing the same thing over and over. But in fact, I think they don't know what to do. They don't know how to increase the complexity. Or they might be viewed as oppositional, where they're not willing to follow other people's directions, when in fact, I think they don't have the perceptual ability to decode what's being asked of them. They have a lot of emotional reactivity to transitions, and I think that that's because they can't predict the future. They don't have that ideation for what might happen in the future, and so it's frightening to them and they put the brakes on. So in the field of autism, I think that this is a critical concept or construct, and also because we have a treatment methodology that can support them to do better. And so when we treat dyspraxia, it's not a skill building model, but it's one in which we build perceptual understanding for the purpose of problem solving. I think that by understanding praxis, people have more compassion with their children, and they understand better the difficulties that their children have to plan. And one particular father comes to my mind because after I explained his son having dyspraxia, he said that it changed the way he interacted with his child. Because before, what he would do is he would give instructions for every step that his son had to do. He would prompt him through every daily routine and what he needed to do for the homework in the school. And he said that he stopped doing that, and instead he would give him choices. And he'd help him to problem solve even in simple things, like which shirt would you like to wear? How would you orient your shirt? Where would you put the fork relative to the plate? What else do you need on the table instead of just a plate and a fork? What else are we missing? And in that way, he was supporting his child's perception of the environment, perception of what he needed to do, and he could start to organize his own activities. And of course, this is also what we want to see in social dynamics, that they can perceive other people's intentions, other people's feelings, other people's interests, and be able to problem solve what do they do with their body and their activities relative to other people for a very positive social interaction. Oh, okay. All right. Well, what we have found in our research in the sensory integration assessments is that there's not only one kind of dyspraxia. There's dyspraxia based on different sensory areas. So you can have dyspraxia based on poor visual perception, or poor auditory perception, or poor body-centered or somatosensation. And then we also see that there's another kind of dyspraxia called ideation, which is the difficulty retrieving those perceptual memories and coming up with the ideas even when you don't have a sensory clue. So in this way, you're thinking, oh, what am I going to do next? Or I have free time, what can I do with my free time? And so ideation allows us to anticipate the future and visualize what we might do in those moments, because I think some of the children, especially those children with autism, are stuck in now and they don't well anticipate the future. And certainly during free time, they sometimes will go back into a very basic form of interaction, or maybe sensory stimulation kind of interaction, something where they're not doing things that are very complex. Well, we're very excited about the evaluation in air sensory integration. We project that this will be able to be accessed around the world by 2020, the year 2020. The authors are Dr. Zoe Melo, Dr. Diane Parham, and myself, Dr. Susanne Smith Roley. And we want this test to, the series of tests, it'll be approximately 20 tests in sensory integration and praxis, and we want it free and accessible to qualified occupational therapists and maybe some other disciplines as well, like physical therapists, speech and language pathologists, possibly psychology, it depends. But we will have a minimum of 4 praxis measures, and they will be assessing the ability to imitate with hands, mouth, and body, the ability to do sequential actions, again with hands, face, and body, the ability to have ideas with objects and just with the body, and we will also have following directions. And the following directions, again, we're going to be including hands, face, and body actions. We also link it to the perceptual tests. So we will also have tactile tests. We have proprioceptive measures that tell about force and direction of movement. We have vestibular and bilateral tests as well. And we often see that those perceptual abilities are linked to those abilities to do those practic activities. Well, we hope by then that we will have all of the tests piloted. We will have the items that discriminate, and we will have them rank ordered in level of difficulty, and we will start our process of training normative data collectors. We have approximately 75 to 80 different countries involved right now that we will be training, and they will be collecting data in their own country, with their own language, with their own children, so that these tests will be universally available and used where needed. Yes, we're very excited to be working with your organization, Occupare, and you will be our primary organization, our link here for Colombia. Well, it's really a joy, and thank you for all your hospitality and your expertise. You have been a leader in South America here in Colombia.